The President, please be seated. The court is now in session. During this morning's session, two counsels for the accused person will be putting questions to Mr. Kum Won. Before we proceed to counsels to put questions to the witness, Mrs. Saikowati is now instructed to report on the current present status of the parties to the proceedings. Mrs. Saikowati. Good morning, Mr. President. The parties to the proceedings are all present except Mr. Ieng Sari, who is now in his holding cell. Mr. Ieng Sari has waived his right to directly participate in the court proceeding for the whole day today. His waiver has been submitted to the greffier of the trial chamber through his counsel. The civil party who will be testifying next is TCCP 28. This civil party is available and awaits call from the chamber. The President, thank you. The chamber now rules upon the request by Mr. Ieng Sari through his counsels. The chamber was seized of the waiver by Mr. Ieng Sari, or the request in which he asked that he be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the full day proceedings. Dr. Kum Som San, who has examined Mr. Ieng Sari, indicates that Mr. Ieng Sari is very fatigued or tired when he moves, and he has pain in his legs, and he could not remain seated for a long period of time. The doctor recommends that Mr. Ieng Sari be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell. In light of that, the chamber grants the request, and according to the doctor, the chamber gathers that Mr. Ieng Sari is mentally able to observe the proceedings, although he is not physically very well. And by way of observing the proceedings from the holding cell, Mr. Ieng Sari can communicate with his counsels from there. So the chamber permits him to observe the proceedings from there for the whole day. AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the AV equipment is well connected to Mr. Ieng Sari's holding cell so that he can observe the proceedings from there. Next, without further ado, we would like to proceed to counsels for Mr. Noon Chia to put questions to the witness. Counsel Son Arun. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors, and very good morning to you, Mr. Kum Won. I am Son Arun, along with my colleague representing Mr. Noon Chia. You have been questioned for some time already. However, on behalf of Noon Chia, I would like to pose some questions to you as follows. You testified before the co-investigating judges with reference to document E3/380. You said you joined the revolution in 1971. And the investigator asked you another question, why you joined the revolution. With regard to these questions or statement, my apologies, you even go further to say that your father was a pro-Samdach Sihanouk Khmer Isarak. I do not quite understand what you mean when you said your father was a pro-Samdach Sihanouk Khmer Isarak. Could you elaborate on that? Response. The resistance to fight the French at that time, and according to my knowledge acquired through study sessions and elderly people, the resistance movement were not composed of just one group. There were several groups, including the one led by King Sihanouk and by the Viet Minh Khmer. So my whole family was in favor of the Samdach Sihanouk group, not the Viet Minh one. Council, thank you. My second question is, during the period of 1970, you said you were 12 years old, and you were assigned to be the leader of the 10 House group. Was that during the colonial authority, or were you under the authority of the Khmer Isarak? Response. I think even you yourself could have known the response already. However, I may wish to respond that it was during the colonial regime, because after the coup d'etat, the whole country was under the rule of the colonial. So every person, including young people who were former officials, were recruited or were asked to go back to work. And I was very young. And I was also asked to work because I could read and write, and I could be of some assistance to them. And my elder brother was a clerk, commune councillor, in other words, and he also served the king or Samdach. So at that time, I felt that only when one was at the age of 18 that he could be assigned or recruited. But I was 12, but I was proved to be of some assistance. And because I was in the family where a lot of members worked as the officials in the former regime, that's why I was asked to work. And because of this, I feel that there was some kind of class contradiction. And later on, the zone conquered by the colonial was inflicted with some class contradiction. People who came from Hanoi felt that those who were under the control of Lonol or under the Sihanouk group would be taken to be executed. So it doesn't matter whether you were young or old, you were perceived to be affiliated with someone. So if I did not join and work for them, then I would also be executed otherwise, because a lot of family members of mine were executed, including Hin and Son. Council intervenes. I would like to interrupt you here. I'm sorry. I would like to proceed to this question. You said you were young and the head of the 10 house group. But what would be your answer? You're the leader or you're the assistant of the 10 house group? The President, witness, could you please hold on before you respond? Otherwise, you could never be heard. You may now proceed. Response. According to my best knowledge, I thought that I was an assistant because I was used as an assistant as the deputy chief of the 10 house group. I did not understand administrative matters or affairs, but at that time I was allowed to do the job. And when it comes to my age, it's rather confusing because when the district governor had problem, they also asked me to assist him. I think if at this moment in time in modern Cambodia, I would not be legal to go to work because I was too young to work. We were then in a child group and we were assigned into a youth young people group, and we had different groups like the peasants group and other different groups. As indicated earlier, my relatives who were not yet old enough to join the revolution were seen joining the revolution ahead of me already. Council, thank you. In 1971, when the North Vietnamese approached Croches, Ratanakiri, and Mandolkiri provinces, at that time, then Samdech Norodom Sihanouk declared or appealed for the people to go to the Maki jungle. On the 2nd of February 1971, you were assigned by someone from the center because you knew someone by the name of Won. Is that the correct account? Response: yes, it is. Question: Mr. Wong was a cadre from the North Vietnam. Can you tell the court more precisely what nationality was Mr. Wong? Was he ordinary person or a military or a cadre from Vietnam who came to induct you into the revolution? Response: I already stated previously concerning my joining the revolution. After the coup d'etat, in the liberated zone, no one was allowed to go unemployed. Children had to work. Even the songs were all the pro-colonial regime songs. People were not allowed to sing pro-Sihanouk songs. So there were people coming to the country from the outside, but the majority of whom were from the North Vietnam, from Hanoi. I asked them how long they had been in Hanoi. Some told me that they had been there more than 10 years before, or more than 10 years. They went there in 1952 or 53 because they were taken by the Vietnamese. These people were called the Viet Minh group or network. They went to the north. They did not go to the liberal country, the country with freedom. They went to the communist part of Vietnam. And when it comes to then Prince Norodom Sihanouk, his influence was appalling and very convincing. And since he appealed for the forces to join forces, we had no choice but be convinced by such appeal. And at that time, I was so tied up that I could not choose any other options. For example, I had only a mother. I am the only child in the family. And this bond tied me up so closely. And at my age back then, I had to go to school and I had a lot of friends, so I could not decide to go to the jungle. So I was well taken care of by the cadres because I am an orphan. I could be very determined and resolute. I could be a role model. In my family, a lot of members were former officials, and because of this background, I was well considered. So both people at the district level, the governor of Son Tuk district also convinced me to join the movement, and Comrade Wong from the North Vietnam, from Hanoi, who was Cambodian, also persuaded me to join the movement. So in a nutshell, I can say that every person was at some point engaged in the movement, whether you are young or old. Council Sonarun, I am sorry to cut you here, but I would like to know Wong, whether he was Cambodian or Vietnamese, but now I got your answer already. I would like to now proceed to another question. You said you were in Krang Slang, Tang Sia, Kampong Speu province. That was your origin, the place of birth. But then when you joined revolution, you went all the way to Steng Trong. Why did you go there? Did you go there because of Mr. Wong? The President, Mr. Witness, could you please be reminded again? Wait until you see the red light before you respond. Thank you. You may now proceed. Response. I think your question has level of suspicion. Let me clarify. During the East Iraq regime, people had to move places. They could not remain in one place for a long time. And it was not strange anyway when we fought the French and our family had to change names, places of our residence. And the French people, they had their own commandos and their soldiers, officials who would like to also hide their identity. So the two groups had to find a way to conceal their identity at best. My grandparents originally were from Kampong Speu. However, when I grew up, I knew that I had to move to another occasion. Council, thank you. My next question is, at K25, you stated that revolutionary flag magazines and revolutionary youth magazines were printed. At that time, the editor-in-chief, Mr. Choi, was in charge of the printing house. Do you know who wrote the two issues, both magazines? Response. With regard to printing, I would like to say that during the 5-year period, I was somehow significantly engaged. But during the 3-year period or the Khmer Rouge time, I was more attached to the photographing section rather than to the printing house. So I do not know much about printing at this moment. Question. So you are saying that you have no idea who could have been the authors of those magazines. Is that correct? Response. Yes, it is. Question. You said you have printed the revolutionary and youth flag, revolutionary flag and revolutionary youth magazines. Now I have another question. Had you ever read the printed magazines? I believe that you have not read all the magazines, but to what extent had you read them? Response. These magazines were distributed to some individuals only. I had not read them much. If I wanted to read any of the magazines, I need to ask Chai for a copy. And I read when Koitun Confession was printed on the magazine. And I also read the content of the magazine in relation to the disappearance of my wife. However, I did not read a lot concerning these magazines. I could have learned from the study sessions already to be able to write very well as a writer, because normally I would go to the bases, the countryside, and when I came back, we would have the briefing session where we could exchange the information we obtained from the fields before we could write. So I was somehow obliged to every now and then read the magazines to keep myself abreast of the situation. Counsel, thank you, Mr. Witness. You said you had read some of the magazines. Do you still recollect the physical appearance of the book, of the magazines, and the text, whether it was handwritten or it was typed? Can you tell us about this? Response: I believe I already stated yesterday in my testimony that during the 5-year period, the texts were handwritten, and people would have to write, to contribute in the writing. For example, I would be writing for the front, and other people would be writing for the youth magazines. However, this was part of the common work for the printing house staff, but we had to divide the labor so that we could focus on each particular area effectively. Counsel, just now you said that you responded to my question concerning who wrote the magazines, the Revolutionary Flag magazines and the Youth Flag magazines. You said you did not know who wrote them. You only was in charge of printing. Just now you said you had to contribute to the articles by writing the texts. My question again is, was all the article or text in the magazines handwritten or typed? Response: I would like to respond into 2 sections. When it comes to writing, yes, it is composing, writing on pieces of paper. But here, I'm not saying that I was a composer myself. I just copying the text so that it could be then printed. And the authors of the texts, as I already indicated, was no other person than Mrs. John Yard for the Youth Flag Youth magazines. And in Phnom Penh, I could also help her in writing some brief new coverage. When it comes to the Revolutionary Flag magazines, it was the sole duty of the party. And I think I already made it clear in my statement yesterday.
Question. What I would like to know was, when you got the Revolutionary Flag printed, did you see the copy was handwritten before they were sent for printing? Or were they typewritten before they were sent to printing houses? The original copy was handwritten. There was no typewritten copies. We handwrote those articles using pen. question. So when the revolutionary flag was sent to the printing house, it was basically handwritten and it was printed in handwritten form. Is that correct?
So,
The President. Counsel, please repeat your question. Because there is a distinction here between the written, handwritten document and they were copied. Then, of course, that documents remain handwritten document. And on the other hand, there was a handwritten copy, but those handwritten copies were sent to the printing house, and then the printing house got them typed before printing. So please make a clear distinction between these two in respect of this question. Both the counsel and the witness should make this clear distinction in response to the question, or as well as to ask the question, because it can be easily confused. Counsel, would you like me to repeat my question, or you can respond to it? Response. I still maintain that I have two separate answers to that question. The original copies were handwritten and it was not photocopied as the President mentioned, because we did not have photocopier machine. And we used this handwritten original with the annotation, and it had to be copied using offset, but at that time we did not have access to electricity, so we could not do that. We had to do it by hand, manually. Even if there was the typewritten document, we did not use them. Instead, we had all of them handwritten. Once we finished writing, we got the staff member to copy them by hand. Then once they produced multiple copies, then we could bind them into a book or magazine. That was how we did it. But as for revolutionary flag, we used the paper for newspaper printing. It was a rather good blank paper. And if we did not have A4 papers or so, then we would use a bigger paper, and we got them copied by hand. We got the equipment supplied by China for copying. That was how we worked with this printing task. It was a technical aspect, purely technical things. It had nothing to do with politics. I think that it was not that difficult to understand. The President. In order to make this issue clearly, the Defense Counsel should refer specifically to the time period within which your question was referred. Counsel, you joined a revolution since you were 12 years of age. It was in 1971. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Back then, Phung's revolutionary struggle, you were one of the Sihanoukist. members. At that time, the FUNC and the Communist Party of Cambodia front started working together. And during that period, you mentioned that it was written in Tongsil and then it was copied. Yes, that is correct. Question. Now, when you see this revolutionary flag, the ones that was given it to you, what distinction can you make? Was it a handwritten printing of the revolutionary flag, or it was the typewritten revolutionary flag, the one piece of document you have before you proffer by the prosecution? This document was the authentic document. It was the typewritten document. It was not a handwritten one. This was the typewritten ones, and it was printed in Sun Haing printing house. Question. So if it was the case, then after you got the original handwritten copies, then you would send them to the printing house for typewriting before they were printed. Is that copy? I know that I am dwelling on the technical aspect of the printing things, but could you please enlighten me on this process of work? Back then, the typewritten document was used by the letter molds, and that letter molds were designed for printing purposes. And that was the working process in the printing house. My brother worked in the printing house, and during that period of the democratic Cambodia, I also witnessed that. So they would organize different sections in the newspapers, and they were typewritten, and they designed it into different blocks of headings, and once it was prepared, then they could type it. We did not use Tongsil. At our printing house, we did not have access to inks and other modern equipment, so we had to do it by hand. As this document I see before me was that the cover page was printed somewhere else, but we had to use a Council, that was really technical stuff. I did not want to dwell on that, so I would like to move on. When you read some of the magazines, according to you, did you see those magazines in the handwritten form or in the typewritten form as what you are seeing now in front of you? Let me clarify this. I still maintain that my work way back in 1975 was in the printing house and also photographic section. So I provided photos, and I also prepared a cliche or offsetting also, because at that time the leaders liked my handwriting because it was rather nice, and they wanted me to write the heading or headlines of the articles. But of course my handwriting was not like the typewritten one, but it was legible and very deliberate. But I did not read the magazines that much, though, because I had a lot of other works to do, and I was not attached to the printing of those magazines anymore. Question. So my question really is this. Did you read the handwritten magazines or the typewritten one? The written one was the one that is being proffered by the prosecution now, and you are having in front of you. Did you read this copy, or you read the written copy, or handwritten copy? President, please wait until your mic is on before you speak. I did read this copy. They were printed already by the printing house. Actually, I was not involved very much in the magazines. I was actually working in the newspaper section. So there was a clear division of work between the magazines and newspapers. Question. I am still not clear. Earlier on, you explained that the revolutionary flag was written by a team of writers, and it was also copied by a team of copiers as well. So you must have seen the original form or original text, because if they were written by a team of writers, you must have read the handwritten form of the document. The President, Counsel, the question is rather misleading, because I would like you to be time-bound in your questions. You have to refer specifically to any period of time, whether it was before 1975 or after 1975. So you have to make your question clear with that, because there was a technological development over the period. So you have to be specific in terms of the period with which you want to ask. So it would be advisable that you divide the time period very clearly in your question, so that it's easier to understand. And we have listened to the testimony about this over the last 2 days, starting from when he was working along the Chinet Tributary. And you should be specific with the time frame, and if you try to mix things and times up, then it would be confusing. So please make sure that you make a clear distinction in your question, and you have to refer specifically to the location of the printing house or the office where he worked as well. I note the defense counsel for Mr. Kilsampon is on her feet, so you may proceed. You may proceed, counsel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Good morning to the chamber and to all of the parties. I am going to raise the issue of translation once again, because these last minutes have been particularly difficult, at least in French, to follow. I'd like to remind you that when we have Khmer speakers, it is important to mark a pause. And today, in the exchange between the President, my colleague, and the witness, it was very, very hard to follow. So I'd like to remind you once again how important it is for us to have this pause for the French translation to be complete. Thank you.
The President. Thank you. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Mr. President, only to clarify again on a translation point. I've written down a sentence. Back then, the typewritten document was used by the letter moles. I don't know if anyone heard anything different, but I'm not sure what a letter mole is.
Response. It is indifferent because even in Khmer I do not understand it either, because it was the technical part of printing and it was in the printing house. I did not understand how it worked in the printing house. They use a pole, for example. I did not know what it was really, because I don't think that we expect the judges to go to the printing house to find out how it works in the printing house. But it would be good enough if we understood how the printing worked at that time, and as well as at the later date, whether or not the document was typewritten or it was handwritten, and whether those handwritten documents were then copied using stone seal or it was copied. We just wanted to know whether or not there was any evolution in terms of the printing techniques in the early 1970s to the mid-1975 until 1979. So we had to make a clear distinction between the printing techniques before 1975 and after 1975. Because the technical aspect of the printing would differ somewhat in the latter stage in the second half of 1970s and that of the first half of the 1970s. Counsel, you may proceed. This particular point is the exculpatory point for this answer. President interrupts. Yes, we understand, counsel. We know that you are representing the interests of your clients. You are trying to find exculpatory evidence to support your clients. But what I would like to emphasize is that you have to make it specifically clear in terms of the time frame of the printing work, which is the one before 1975 and the one after 1975. Counsel Sonoran. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to now move on. You told the court that this revolutionary flag was the genuine document from the Democratic Cambodia. So I would like to ask you again, when did you see this magazine in a handwritten form, and when did you see it in the typewritten form as the one you are actually seeing now? Response. The handwritten form of the flag was during the 5-year war period before 1975. But after 1975, the magazine were typewritten and using offsetting. So once again, the format as well as the style of the magazines were differs from 1975 to 1979, from that in the early 1970s. Question. I did not want to dwell on the technical aspect. I just would like to know whether or not you saw the handwritten copy of the magazine or the typewritten copy of the magazines. Did you notice any distinction or so between the handwritten magazines and the typewritten one, particularly the one that is being proffered by the prosecution to you now? This document, to my understanding, was printed in 1975, and the handwritten document were mainly on the handwritten one was mainly the headlines or the cover page, and as for the magazines later on and newspaper were all typewritten. Thank you. Question. If you look at the copy you have in front of you now, did you see these magazines in the first half of the 1970s? And if you compare between the two periods from 1970 to 1975 and that after 1975 to 1979, did you notice any distinction or difference between the copy of this magazine? This was a copied magazine, but I can confirm that it is a genuine magazine published in 1975. I know that they engage a more modern printing technology then. And since it could be could be typewritten, then you can see that this is a typewritten magazine. And as for the cover, it was printed using offset technique. Question. If that is the case, then the magazine that you saw during the 5 years period before 1975 was different from the one that you later saw printed in 1975 and afterward. Is that correct? The format is basically the same, but I look at this copy, it is in black and white. But when it was printed using stencil, it was printed in red, the cover, and it was printed in 1975, and the printing was the same in format except the printing techniques, but the format itself was the same. But in 1977, what is worth noting was that there were no longer 5 red flags, but there was only one. It was changed in 1977. Even in 1976, it was not changed. There were still 5 flags on the magazines, but in 1997, 1 flag was used instead on the cover page of that magazine. Thank you. I now move on to another question. In the same document, E3/370, your response concerning the structure of the government as well as the People Representatives Assembly of the Democratic Cambodia. You said Nuon Chea was the chairman of the People's Representative Assembly. Chea Sim was the vice chairman. This question was asked by the prosecution, but I would like to expand a little bit on this portion of your answer. And after Chea Sim, there was Matley, who was also the second vice chairperson of below Nuon Chea. The prosecutor asked you that question already, so I would like to expand on that because you only mentioned Chea Sim as the vice chairman, but now I would like to add one more vice chairman, that was Mr. Mat Lee. Do you stand by this statement?
Response. What I was talking about was during that period of time, and I did state like that and stand by the position because it was based on my analysis during the period. My colleagues shared the same view. I do not know whether our thought was wrong, but that's what we thought back then. However, I do not know anything about this document, about the structure of the government or the party. I was not fully aware of this. I had been busy going down to the fields to pay attention to this in detail. But at that time, I may be wrong, but that's what every other people around me would be thinking about. But I still feel that I was correct. That's what I thought. And when the question was put to me by the court at that time, it was referring to that period of time, and I still stand by the position. Again, I do not know the exact organization or structure of or the positions of this individual, even though I still maintain what I stated before the co-investigators. Counsel, thank you. In response to another question, you stated before the co-investigators that the standing committee, rather the central committee comprised of Mr. Pol Pot as the secretary of the party, when Mr. Nuon Chea was the deputy secretary of the party, and other people. But you did not state the members, other members. You only referred to two individuals. This was your response to the question by the Central Committee in the question of the co-investigators. Now my question to you is, according to your best knowledge, how many people were in the Central Committee? If not, just say no. Response: I don't know anything about this, but I know for sure that there were number 1 and number 2 in the Central Committee. Counsel, thank you. In your response, on the same page E3/8, 1980, you said you used to be a Khmer Rouge cadre. Nuon Chea, Khieu Samphan and Pol Pot knew me, but I have never known Ieng Sari and Ieng Thirit. Have you known Pol Pot, Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan very well? Response. I was not a cadre in the party. I was in the youth league, or a so-called outside the party cadre. I was in the front. For a youth league, they had 3 committees. And people in charge in the youth league also called cadres, but not the cadres of the party. So I can conclude that when it comes to cadres, we have outside cadres and inside the party cadres. Intellectuals and pillar persons were also considered as cadres, but not the party's cadres. They were outside of the party's cadres. I was in charge as a cadre, but I did not belong to the party. I was in charge when Bong Choi was absent. I was in charge of the head of the newspaper, and I was perceived as a cadre by the minister, but technically I was not the inside of the party's cadre, but I was an outside cadre. Question. Mr. Witness, you said you know these 3 leaders very well. You said this yesterday. When it comes to knowing someone very well, can you be more precise? Do you know Pol Pot very well? And if so, can you describe him? His personality, was he a cruel person, barbaric person, or a nationalist, a person who loved his own country, person who had good thought before implementing or making any decision? Response. The President, Counsel for the Civil Party, you may now proceed, and witness, could you please hold on? Counsel for the Civil Party. Mr. President, thank you. National Counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea is now asking the witness to give his idea on the character of a person concerned. Counsel, I would like to respond. These questions have been asked time again, and there was never any objections. But now I put this question, and it was objected, but I still insist that the question be responded. And I also would like to have follow-up questions with this. The President, Mr. Witness, you are now instructed to respond to the question. The objection by the lead co-lawyer for the civil party is not sustained. Response. Having been in contact with him, or in our daily life with them, I can still say that I know them very well. In respect of the character, I already talked about Mr. Kyu Samphan. How convincing his messages could have been, how popular he was among the popular mass he had been. The President intervenes. Mr. Witness, this question is about Pol Pot this time, and this question may link to Nuon Chea, so it is no longer about Kyu Samphan. So please compose yourself to respond to the question by counsel and try your best to be straightforward to the point in the question rather than making further statements that are not relevant. We are afraid that it is a waste of time by doing so. And the worst thing is that if you try to give further statement than needed, then they are not relevant and lack of property value. Here, during the debate, it is called the examination of a witness. So we are not impeaching the witness. So it's not difficult if you respond to the question directly. Now, he asked about Pol Pot. So answer to that question. If you know him, you know his character, say so. If you don't, say no. You are not supposed to make any further statement or comments concerning other people or character of other individual because you are not an expert on this. And I think you have already been apprised of this time and again. Response. I still maintain my position that I know Mr. Pol Pot very well, and let me elaborate. During education sessions in 1976, he came to instruct us, and he encouraged us and asked us to do good things. However, I never knew that he committed any other things other than the perceived personality or the person whom I know. His instructions were of good things. He reminded us about the 12-point morality. So I could still see him as a person of good personality, good character. That was during the 5-year period. But at a later date, I also observed that he could have made some mistakes because he believed heavily on what he was reported about. He believed in reports, in other words. Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Wun. What about Mr. Nuon Chea, the person whom you claim you have known very well? Can you describe his character? Response. Mr. Nuon Chea was a friendly and simple person. He also advised us on how to do good things like other people. So he's an ordinary person like others. And he only instructed us to do well at job and to live a good life, for example. Council, thank you. You were a middle-level cadre before the CPK regime, and during the CPK period, you also been involved significantly. Can you now tell the court about the structure of the CPK, whether there were different bodies like the executive body, the government, the legislative body, the assembly, and also another body, whether such bodies existed during the period of democratic Cambodia? Response. With regard to the party section, I note that Pol was number 1, Nuon Chea was number 2, and I don't know the rest. And for the government, Pol was still number 1, and Deputy Prime Minister Mr. Ieng Sary in charge of Foreign Affairs, Son Sen for the National Defense, and some other Deputy Prime Ministers that I don't recollect. Question. What about the legislative body? I'm referring to the People Representative Assembly. Do you know who was in charge of the assembly? Response. I already stated earlier on that, and I still stand by my position. It was my belief and what other people felt back then, and that's all the people I knew who had held the position rather. And I said that I knew Chea Sim, Nuon Chea, and Mat Lee. And I do not know others, because we were at the newspaper section and we did not pay great attention to people in the assembly or elsewhere. Some of us did not even remember who would be the leaders of different sections, because at that time the information was limited. It was not like the much read newspapers of current Cambodia. Question. You said Mr. Chea Sim was the head of the People's Representative Assembly. So do you know whether Mr. Chea Sim held any other positions? The President, Mr. Counsel, could you please rephrase your question? Perhaps you could have been mistaken in your line of questioning. Question. I would like to repeat it. You said you know that Mr. Nuon Chea was the chairman of the People Representative Assembly. But apart from his being the People's Representative Assembly, did he have any other function? Response. I already stated that when Mrs. Yonyat was absent, Mr. Nuon Chea was attached to the propaganda section on education programs. He was there to disseminate information concerning agriculture. The information he quoted from a thick book by the Chinese expert. And also he instructed people at the editorial department in their propaganda section. Thank you, says counsel. I have only final question to put to you. You were the middle-level cadre, as I indicated during the Khmer Rouge period, or in the CPK. Have you ever seen any document pinpointing the structure, the organizational structure of the CPK? Response. I think I already stated previously that in my group and I myself did not pay great attention to the organizational structure of the party or the government. We were busy taking photographs and accompany delegations. I never attended such meetings in the assembly or in the government. I was concentrating on writing about farming, about building canals and agriculture. So our newspapers were meant to disseminate information about these confined topics. So here, like in the modern Cambodia, the newspapers would capture the traffic accident immediately, but at that time we had to capture immediate information, update information about agriculture and farming and building canals. And people felt that Nuon Chea was the People's Representative Assembly when Chea Sim was his deputy, and Matli was also holding this position. We read from the documents back then. It was not the idea that we just obtained quite recently. It was what we thought back then. The President, Mr. Witness, could you please be more precise to the question? You just say yes or no. I don't know, or I know. So you should refrain from making further statements, because if you making more statements that are not relevant to the question, then you are repeating yourself, and we are afraid we cannot move more expeditiously because of that. If you feel that the question is not clear enough, you may ask counsel to repeat the question and then be brief in your response. Counsel, thank you, Mr. President. I have no further questions. I thank you very much, Mr. Witness. I would like now to cede the floor to my colleague. The President, thank you, Counsel, but we are afraid that it is now an appropriate moment for the adjournment already. We may observe the 20-minute adjournment, and the next session will be resumed accordingly. Court officer is instructed to assist the witness during the break. The next session is resumed by 20 to 11.